If this video has found its way to you today, do not mistake it for a random occurrence. The algorithm may be the mechanism, but it is not the cause. Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychiatrist, spoke of moments like these as synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that act as bridges between the inner world of your soul and the outer world of your reality. You are here listening to this voice because a signal is being sent from the depths of your own unconscious. You are here because you have passed through something that most people never survive intact. Jung discovered that life in its infinite complexity presents every human being with a threshold. He termed it the final test. It is not a test of academic knowledge or physical strength. It is a confrontation with the unconscious so intense, so shattering, that it threatens to dissolve the very glue that holds your personality together. It is the moment when the life you built can no longer contain the person you are becoming. Here is the secret that makes this discovery so vital and perhaps so terrifying. Most people who are currently in the middle of this test believe they are dying. They believe they are having a breakdown. They look at the ruins of their old life, the ended relationships, the lost ambition, the overwhelming confusion, and they think something has gone terribly wrong with their mind. But Jung realized that the truth is the exact opposite. You are not experiencing a breakdown. You are experiencing a breakthrough. This is the exact moment when consciousness attempts to evolve beyond its previous limitations. If you are still watching, still searching, still trying to understand the why behind your suffering, you have already passed the most dangerous part of the trial. The question now is simply whether you understand the secret this passage has unlocked for you. Because once you grasp what Jung discovered about this transformation, everything that felt like pointless suffering suddenly reveals itself as a necessary initiation. The final test never announces itself with fanfare. It does not knock politely on your door. It arrives disguised as crisis, as catastrophe, or as a slow, suffocating collapse of meaning. You might be experiencing it right now as a sudden, aching isolation. You feel cut off from people you thought were permanent fixtures in your life. The conversations that used to sustain you now feel empty. The career ambitions that used to drive you out of bed in the morning now feel hollow, like a game you no longer wish to play. You are not depressed in the clinical sense, though the world will rush to label you as such. You are experiencing what Jung called the withdrawal of psychic energy from external objects. This is a biological and spiritual necessity. Your unconscious is forcefully pulling your energy inward away from the world because something fundamental within your internal structure is demanding a renovation. The energy that used to go into pleasing others, into building a reputation, into maintaining the status quo, it has all been recalled to headquarters. The symptoms are unmistakable once you have the eyes to see them. First, you lose interest in the social masks that once felt essential. Small talk becomes physically painful. You find yourself sitting at dinner tables with friends or family, feeling like an alien species, wondering how everyone else can be so content with the surface level of existence, while you feel an earthquake happening inside your chest. Your friends notice you've changed. They ask if you are okay. They worry you are spiraling. They want you to return to normal. But here is the brutal truth they do not understand. You cannot go back. Normal was the problem. Normal was the cage. You have outgrown the psychological container that used to hold you. Your psyche is demanding more space, more truth, and more raw authenticity than your old life could ever accommodate. This is not regression. This is aggressive growth that looks like disintegration to those who are still trapped in unconscious living. The isolation you feel during this period serves a specific ancient purpose that Jung documented across hundreds of cases. When you are alone, stripped of social validation, stripped of the noise of the crowd, you are forced to do the one thing human beings fear most. You are forced to encounter your actual self. Most people spend their entire lives constructing elaborate defenses to avoid this encounter. We fill every silence with podcasts, with music, with work, with other people's drama, so we never have to hear the voice that speaks in the silence. We run from the questions, who am I beneath these roles? Who am I when I am not a husband, a wife, an employee, a success, or a failure? What do I actually want versus what I have been conditioned to pursue? Which parts of my personality are real and which are just survival strategies? I developed as a child to avoid rejection. These questions are terrifying because they require you to sit with uncertainty. They require you to admit that you don't know who you are anymore. But this tolerance for uncertainty is exactly what you are developing during the final test. You are learning to exist without the psychological crutches that most people depend on until their dying breath. Carl Jung himself walked this path, and his experience became the map for the rest of us. In 1913, at the age of 37, Jung was at the absolute peak of his professional success. He was Sigmund Freud's chosen successor, the heir apparent to the kingdom of psychoanalysis. He had fame, he had respect, he had a thriving practice. And then, without warning, the floor fell out. Something inside him snapped. He began experiencing apocalyptic visions. He heard voices that did not belong to him. He felt emotions that threatened to overwhelm his sanity. His colleagues thought he was having a psychotic break. Jung himself, a doctor of the mind, feared he was going insane. He lost his friendship with Freud. His professional standing became unstable. He withdrew from the university. For 6 years, Jung descended into the underworld. He entered what he later called his confrontation with the unconscious. He didn't take medication to numb the voices. He didn't distract himself with work. Instead, he did something revolutionary. He turned toward the darkness. He treated his own psyche as a laboratory. He began to write and paint his experiences in what became known as the Red Book, a massive leather-bound tome filled with the terrifying and beautiful images that were erupting from his soul. To the outside world, he looked like a man who had lost his mind. His wife Emma worried he would never return. People speculated that his career was over. But Jung wasn't losing his mind. He was finding his soul. He was integrating contents that had been unconscious for centuries. He was proving that what looks like madness is often the painful process of the psyche reorganizing itself at a higher level of complexity, if you are seeing yourself in this story. If you feel like you are walking through your own version of 1913 where the old structures are falling and the new ones haven't been built yet, take a breath. You are not broken. You are an alchemist in the middle of the transmutation process. Before we descend deeper into the 3 specific stages of this test, I want to ask you a small favor. If you are ready to stop running from this process and start understanding it, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. By doing so, you are not just supporting us. You are making a micro-commitment to your own growth. You are signaling to your unconscious that you are ready for the truth, no matter how heavy it may be. Join us. We are exploring the depths together. Here is where Jung's story reveals the controversy that still disturbs conventional psychology today. Society calls what Jung experienced and what you are likely experiencing a pathology. They call it a crisis requiring immediate correction medication and a swift return to productivity. But Jung discovered it was an initiation, a necessary death and rebirth of the psychological self. The final test is the moment when your old identity must die so something authentic can finally breathe. This isn't a metaphor. It is a literal psychological death where everything you believed about yourself dissolves into mist. The controversy isn't that this experience is painful. Everyone acknowledges the suffering involved. The controversy is Jung's claim that this suffering is purposeful. Modern psychiatry often wants to medicate these experiences into submission to numb the discomfort until you can go back to your cubicle. Jung insisted they must be consciously undergone. He argued that the psyche is trying to break through to a new level of consciousness, and suppressing the symptoms only postpones the necessary evolution. If you are brave enough to continue, we must look at the map. The final test unfolds in 3 distinct stages. Each one strips away another layer of your psychological defense until you are left with nothing but the bedrock of your soul. Understanding these stages is the difference between drowning in the chaos and learning to swim. The first stage. The withdrawal of projection. For the vast majority of your life, without even realizing it, you have been projecting your internal power onto external sources. You blamed others for your problems. You gave authority figures godlike control over your self-worth. You made other people responsible for your happiness and your misery. You looked to romantic partners to complete you. You waited for your parents to finally give you the approval you've been chasing since you were 6 years old. You waited for the world to tell you that you matter. During the first stage of the final test, these projections suddenly and violently collapse. The illusion breaks. You stop seeing your parents as all-powerful beings who hold the keys to your worth. You see them as flawed humans who are just figuring it out. You stop believing your partner can save you from your own loneliness. You stop giving your boss or society permission to define your value. This withdrawal feels like a funeral. It feels like loss because you are losing the comfortable, warm illusion that someone else is driving the car. But in reality, this is the first taste of terrifying absolute power. You are taking back all the psychic energy you scattered across external objects. For the first time, you are forced to swallow the bitter pill of truth. Nobody is coming to save you. Nobody can fix what is broken inside you. Nobody else holds the answers you are seeking. This realization is devastating. It can leave you feeling abandoned, but it is also the only path to liberation. Once you stop looking for a savior, you are finally free to become one. The second stage, the encounter with the shadow. Once the projections are withdrawn and you are sitting alone with your own power, you face the second stage, what Jung considered the most dangerous part of the entire journey. You encounter your shadow. The shadow is the basement of your psyche. It contains everything you have spent your entire life denying, repressing, and projecting onto others. It is the rage you've never expressed because you wanted to be a good person. The selfishness you've always condemned. The cruelty you insist you are incapable of. The ambition you've judged as arrogance. The sexuality you've shamed. Every quality you have disowned in order to be civilized is waiting for you here. What makes the shadow encounter so traumatizing is that you can no longer deny these aspects exist within you. You see clearly, perhaps, for the first time that you are capable of the very behaviors you have judged most harshly in others. You realize that your righteous indignation at the world was often just a mirror of your own inner darkness. This feels like a moral collapse. You look in the mirror and think, if I contain all these dark qualities, am I a monster? If I am capable of manipulation and cruelty, how am I different from the people I hate? But Jung discovered something profound that transforms this entire ordeal. Integrating the shadow doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a complete person. The shadow isn't evil. It is simply unconscious. These qualities, aggression, selfishness, pride, are not inherently destructive. They only become destructive when they are denied and acted out in the dark. When you bring the shadow into the light, alchemy happens. The rage becomes the capacity for healthy boundary setting. It becomes the sword you use to protect what you love. The selfishness becomes necessary self-care and the wisdom to prioritize your own energy. The cruelty becomes discernment, the ability to see who is trying to exploit you. The shadow provides the density and weight you need to stand your ground in a chaotic world. You don't act out these qualities anymore because you have made them conscious. You choose when to use the sword rather than having it swing wildly in the dark. If you are feeling the weight of this description, if you are currently wrestling with parts of yourself you'd rather not see, take a moment to breathe. This is the hardest work a human being can do. There is no shame in finding this difficult. In fact, if it wasn't difficult, it wouldn't be real. If you're finding value in this breakdown of the soul, consider subscribing to our channel. We are building a library for the seekers, for the ones who choose truth over comfort. Your support helps us keep these fires burning. The third stage, the death of the persona. After you have faced your shadow, you must endure the third stage. This is the one that most disturbs the people around you. Your persona. The social mask you have worn your entire life falls away completely. The persona is the acceptable face you show the world. It is the professional identity on LinkedIn. It is the perfect mother, the reliable friend, the nice guy. You have likely spent decades perfecting this mask, polishing it until it shone, making it so convincing that even you began to believe it was your real self. You learned exactly what to say to make people like you. You became a chameleon. During the final test, maintaining the persona becomes impossible. It feels physically heavy, like wearing a suit of armor that is 2 sizes too small. You can't fake enthusiasm for social performances anymore. You can't force yourself to care about the petty dramas of the tribe. This leads to what Jungians call social death. You are at a party and, instead of working the room, you are watching yourself work the room, and you feel a deep, nausea-inducing disgust at the performance. You are in a meeting, and you are acutely aware of how fake everyone sounds, including yourself. People who knew your persona become confused. They feel threatened. They keep waiting for you to snap out of it. They offer advice. You need to get out more. You need to get back to normal. Family members might accuse you of becoming selfish. Friends might drift away because you are no longer playing the role they cast you in. But the persona isn't coming back. It was a construction. It was a survival strategy you developed to navigate a world that punished raw authenticity. Now that you have glimpsed the shadow and withdrawn the projections, you can't unknow what you know. You are left standing naked in your essential self without the protective covering that made you socially acceptable. And this is where the fear sets in. Society has conditioned you to believe that if you drop the mask, you will be rejected, exiled, and destroyed. But this is where the magic happens. This is the threshold of the miracle. Because when the mask falls and you do not die, you become something else entirely. Here is part 3 of the script. This is the conclusion, focusing on the secret of integration and the specific powers gained after passing the test. Title: You see this because you passed the final test. Carl Jung reveals the secret of the soul. Format: voiceover, only length. Part 3 of 3 approx. 1,000 words. Part 3, the integration and the return. So what happens after the persona falls? What happens when you are stripped down to raw authenticity, without your social masks, without your projections, without your shadows safely hidden in the dark? By all conventional logic, you should be destroyed. You should be vulnerable, weak, and socially exiled. Society has spent your entire life conditioning you to believe that authenticity equals destruction. But this is where Jung discovered the secret that changes everything. The moment of passing the final test isn't about fighting the darkness or frantically reconstructing your defenses. It is about accepting everything you have discovered. This is the secret integration. Not improvement, not perfection, not spiritual bypassing where you pretend to be above human emotions. Integration. You don't get rid of your shadow. You accept it as the ballast of your ship. You don't rebuild your persona to trick people. You learn to wear it lightly, like a coat you can take off, rather than a second skin that suffocates you. You don't project power back onto external authorities. You claim your own authority while remaining humble about the limits of your knowledge. Integration means holding the tension of opposites within yourself without needing to resolve them into false simplicity. You acknowledge that you are capable of both kindness and cruelty, so you choose kindness consciously, knowing exactly what the alternative is. You are capable of both selfishness and generosity, so you give freely, not because you should, but because it flows from your abundance. You contain both darkness and light. You stop pretending the darkness doesn't exist, and in doing so, you rob it of its power to control you. This is what Jung meant by the union of opposites. You are not trying to be a saint. You are trying to be a whole human being. And this wholeness creates a kind of psychological stability that most people never experience in 10 lifetimes. When you pass the test, specific abilities emerge. Jung documented these in people who successfully integrated their unconscious contents. These aren't superpowers in the Marvel sense, but in a world of sleepwalkers they might as well be. First, you develop a supernatural calm. Chaotic situations no longer fragment you. While others panic over the news, the economy, or social drama, you remain centered. Why? Because you have already faced the worst thing possible, your own inner darkness. You have stared into the abyss of your own soul and survived. External chaos cannot devastate you the way it devastates people who haven't done this work. You have an anchor that they do not. Job loss, relationship endings, social rejection. These things still hurt. They still sting, but they do not destroy your fundamental sense of self. You know who you are, and that knowledge is fireproof. Second, you possess piercing insight. Your ability to read people becomes razor-sharp. You see through social masks instantly because you are no longer wearing one yourself. You detect lies and manipulation effortlessly because you are no longer lying to yourself. You sense emotional patterns and hidden motivations in seconds. People might sometimes accuse you of being too intense or judgmental, but you are simply seeing what is actually there rather than what people are pretending to present. This ability can be isolating. Truth is a lonely business, but it saves you years of wasted time. You stop investing in people and systems that are committed to misunderstanding you. Third, you become immune to manipulation. This is the most dangerous power of all to the status quo. People who try to use guilt, shame, or social pressure to control you find their tactics mysteriously ineffective. You have withdrawn your projections, so authority figures have no power over you. You have integrated your shadow so people can't shame you with your own flaws. You already know them better than they do. You have dropped your persona, so the threat of social disapproval means nothing to you. When someone tries to guilt-trip you, you recognize it as a manipulation tactic, not a moral imperative. You become very difficult to control. You belong to yourself. Fourth, you develop a sense of destiny. This isn't arrogance. It is a quiet hum of certainty that your life has a purpose beyond paying bills and dying. You are connected to something larger than your ego. You stop trying to live the life your parents wanted for you. You stop trying to live the life Instagram tells you to want. You start living from your essential self. You move with the current of your own soul rather than swimming upstream against your own nature. If you are still listening to my voice, if these descriptions resonate with the ache in your chest, you are part of a rare group. Jung called the people who complete this journey individuated. You have become the individual you were always meant to be beneath the conditioning. Your suffering was not random. It was the friction necessary to polish the diamond. Every moment of isolation taught you self-reliance. Every loss of interest in shallow pursuits redirected your energy toward depth. Every time your heart broke, it broke open to allow more reality in. The test was not a punishment, it was a graduation. You have officially passed just by understanding this concept. Most people never recognize what is happening during their final test. They get medicated, they get distracted, they run back to the safety of the herd. But you stayed. You faced the fire. You questioned the nature of your reality until you found the answer. Jung believed that this process represents the next step in human evolution. Not biological evolution, but psychological evolution. You are a pioneer of the inner world. By facing your own darkness, you make it slightly easier for the collective consciousness to face its own. You are not just healing yourself, you are healing the timeline. The most beautiful aspect of passing the final test is that you don't lose your humanity. You don't become a cold, distant sage on a mountain. You become capable of real, terrifying, beautiful love. For the first time, you can love someone without needing them to complete you. You can experience joy that isn't dependent on external validation. You can engage with life fully because you are no longer afraid of its depths. You are ready to claim the secret your suffering has purchased. Integration is your superpower. You contain multitudes. You are no longer afraid of yourself. If you have recognized your own journey in these words, I want you to do one final thing. It is a small act, but a powerful one. Comment below with the words, "I passed the test." Do not write it for the algorithm. Write it for yourself. Write it to cement your recognition of this transformation. Make it conscious. Make it deliberate. Claim what you have earned through your resilience. And if this video helped you understand the chaos of your life in a new way, press the like button and subscribe. We are building a sanctuary for the seekers, for the alchemists, for those who are brave enough to explore the shadow. Share this with someone who is currently in the middle of their own crisis. Send them the message that what looks like a breakdown is actually a breakthrough. You have found the secret. The test wasn't trying to destroy you. It was introducing you to yourself. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension. Carl Jung once proposed a terrifying idea that most modern psychologists are too afraid to touch. He suggested that the reality we see with our eyes, the buildings, the job titles, the social hierarchies, the polite smiles at dinner parties, is nothing more than a thin, fragile veneer painted over the true nature of existence. Most people are content to live on that surface. In fact, they are desperate to stay there. They trust only what they can touch, what they can measure, and what they can logically explain. They are the censors, the builders of civilization who keep the machinery of society running by focusing entirely on the here and now. But there is another type of human, a rarer, more ancient, and often infinitely more misunderstood breed, whom Jung classified as the intuitive. If you have clicked on this video, there is a very high probability that you have spent your entire life feeling like you are watching a completely different movie than everyone else around you. While they are laughing at a joke, you are noticing the hidden aggression in the punchline. While they are celebrating a new political leader or a corporate merger, you are physically recoiling because you can already see the inevitable betrayal that is coming 3 years down the line. You see the hidden strings that move the puppets. You hear the words that are never spoken. You perceive the trajectory of a relationship ending before it has even officially begun. To the outside world, this doesn't look like a gift. To your family, you might seem anxious, overly analytical, difficult, or even paranoid. They tell you to stop overthinking. They tell you to just enjoy the moment. But they don't understand that you aren't trying to be difficult. You are simply operating with a sensory apparatus that picks up frequencies they are biologically deaf to. Jung defined intuition not as a magical power, and certainly not as a superstition. He defined it as a noble biological function, perception via the unconscious. It is the ability to see around corners, to grasp the whole before you have seen the parts, and to understand the meaning of a fact rather than just the fact itself. But in a world obsessed with data spreadsheets and superficial proof, possessing high-level intuition can feel less like a gift and more like a heavy burden. You are often the Cassandra of your circle, cursed to see the truth, but doomed to be disbelieved until it is too late. Today, we are not just going to list traits. We are going to validate your entire existence. We are going to explore the 5 definitive, undeniable signs that you possess this high-level intuition. We will dissect why you see what others ignore, how to stop doubting your gut when it contradicts logic, and how to finally trust the inner voice that has been right all along. This is an investigation into the architecture of your own mind. Let's begin with the first and perhaps most isolating sign, the holographic perception of time. For the average person, time is linear and simple. A leads to B, which leads to C. They make decisions based almost entirely on what is happening right in front of them now. If the economy looks good today, they assume it will be good tomorrow. If a new partner is charming today, they assume that person is good. They live in the immediate sensory experience. But you don't live in the now, in the traditional sense. You live in the potential. You live in the probability fields of the future. When you look at a situation, you don't just see it as a static snapshot. You see it as a motion picture. Jung noted that the intuitive type is always looking for the germ of the future in the present moment. You see the seed and your mind immediately, effortlessly fast forwards to perceive the tree, the fruit, and the eventual decay. This is why you often find yourself detached, unimpressed, or even strangely cold in moments of collective excitement. Think back to a time when everyone around you was swept up in a new trend. Maybe it was a cryptocurrency hype, a whirlwind romance that your best friend got into, or a too-good-to-be-true job opportunity. The energy in the room was high. Everyone was celebrating. But you felt a knot in your stomach. You couldn't explain it with facts, not yet, but you knew with absolute chilling certainty that the foundation was rotten. You saw the crash while everyone else was enjoying the ride. This ability makes you an incredible strategist, but it is also the primary source of your social isolation. You are the person standing in the corner of the party, unable to raise a glass to the next big thing because you can already see the fatal flaw. You have likely warned friends, whispering to them, "I don't think you should trust that guy," or "Be careful with this investment." And what happened? They called you cynical. They called you negative. They said you couldn't just let people be happy. And then, 6 months later, or a year later, when the crash happened exactly as you predicted, down to the very detail, they came back to you. They asked, "How did you know?" They looked at you with a mix of awe and fear, but you didn't know in terms of having a dossier of facts. You perceived the pattern. You saw the ghost of the future haunting the present. You were living in a timeline that hadn't happened yet. This burden of foresight is heavy, but it is the first confirmation that your mind is wired for the horizon, not the pavement. This leads us directly into the second sign, which is perhaps the most uncomfortable and visceral aspect of high-level intuition, X-ray vision for the shadow. Carl Jung spent his entire life studying the shadow, the dark, repressed side of the human personality. It contains everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves, our greed, our envy, our aggression, our capacity for cruelty. Now, most people are easily fooled by what Jung called the persona, the social mask. We are trained from birth to polish this mask. If someone smiles, makes eye contact, uses polite language, and wears a nice suit, the average person assumes they are good. They judge the book by the cover, because the cover is all they can see. But you possess a built-in lie detector that is almost impossible to shut off. You can physically feel the dissonance between a person's mask and their true intent. It's a glitch in the matrix that only you seem to notice. Have you ever met someone whom everyone else loved? Maybe a charismatic leader, a popular new co-worker, or a saintly figure in your community. On paper, they were perfect. They said all the right things. But when you shook their hand, or when you looked into their eyes for a split second, you felt an immediate visceral wave of revulsion. Your skin crawled, your stomach dropped. The hair on the back of your neck stood up. You looked around, waiting for someone else to react, but everyone else was charmed. They were laughing at the jokes. They were buying the act hook, line, and sinker. And in that moment, you probably questioned your own sanity. You thought, am I the crazy one? Am I just being judgmental? Jung would tell you no. You are not judging, you are perceiving. High-level intuitives listen to the music behind the words. You pick up on the micro-expressions that flash for a millisecond before the smile is plastered back on. You hear the subtle change in tone, the frequency of arrogance hiding behind false humility. You feel the emptiness in their eyes that no amount of charisma can fill. You are seeing their shadow. And here is the dangerous part. When you look at someone and see their shadow, they can feel it. People living in deception are terrified of being seen. They might not understand why they are uncomfortable around you, but they know that your gaze penetrates their armor. This is why you might find that narcissists, manipulators, and sociopaths have a very polarized reaction to you. They either try to seduce you intensely to control the one person who sees through them, or they instantly hate you without cause to destroy the witness. You are the glitch in their deception. You are the mirror they cannot avoid. And while this makes your life more difficult because you cannot simply get along with fakes, it is a supreme protective mechanism. You are nature's way of identifying the predator, even when the predator is dressed in silk. If this level of perception feels heavy to you, if you are tired of carrying the weight of seeing the truth in a world that prefers pretty lies, I want you to know that you are not alone. It is easy to feel isolated when you are the only one awake in a sleeping house. But there is a reason you found this video. We are building a community of thinkers, seekers, and intuitives here who are ready to explore the depths of the human psyche without fear. We don't just skim the surface, we dive into the abyss together. If you want to join us and ensure you don't miss these deep dives, take a second right now to subscribe. It's a small click for you, but it's a massive signal to yourself that you are ready to claim your psychological sovereignty. Welcome to the few who understand. Now let's go deeper into the biology of your intuition with the third sign, visceral somatic intelligence. For centuries, Western society has taught us to separate our minds from our bodies. We are taught that intelligence lives in the brain, in the neocortex, and that the body is just a vehicle that carries the head around. We are taught to trust spreadsheets, logic data, and pros and cons lists. But Jung and modern neuroscience after him knew that the unconscious is not just in the brain. It is in the body. The nervous system is a singular network. For high-level intuitives, the body is not just a vehicle, it is a highly sensitive antenna. You know things with your gut before you know them with your head. This isn't a metaphor, it is a physiological reality. Imagine you walk into a room where a couple has just been arguing. They stopped the moment you entered. They are smiling. They are offering you tea. The logic of the situation says everything is fine, but the air feels thick, almost gelatinous. You feel a sudden tightness in your chest. Your breathing becomes shallow. You might even get a sudden headache. You are physically registering the residual emotional energy in the room. You are absorbing the tension that hasn't been grounded. Or perhaps you are about to make a logical, sensible decision like taking a high-paying job or moving to a better city. It makes perfect sense on paper. Your parents are proud your bank account will grow, your friends are jealous. But every time you think about signing the contract, you feel a wave of nausea. You feel physically heavy as if gravity has doubled. You wake up tired. You have weird dreams. That is your intuition bypassing your intellect. Your logic is saying yes, but your somatic intelligence is screaming no. It is telling you that this path is a dead end for your soul. It is telling you that the environment is toxic even if the paycheck is clean. High-level intuitives often suffer from mysterious physical ailments, chronic fatigue, stomach issues, migraines, sudden autoimmune flares, because they are not just processing their own biological stress. They are processing the unacknowledged stress of their environment. You are a biological barometer. If the environment is sick, you will be the first to feel it. The challenge for you is not learning to feel you already feel too much. The challenge is discernment. You must learn to ask, is this mine or am I picking up on the hidden signal of this environment? The fourth sign takes us into the realm of creativity and intellect, the transcendent function or the ability to connect the unconnected. Jung described the transcendent function as the mind's ability to bridge the gap between the conscious and the unconscious, creating a third, higher perspective. In practical terms, this means you are a master of synthesis. We live in a world obsessed with specialization. We are taught to know more and more about less and less. The engineer talks to the engineer. The artist talks to the artist. But you are a generalist of the universe. Your mind is a spider web that connects everything to everything else. You see the connection between 18th century architecture and modern pop music. You understand how a childhood trauma relates to a global political movement. You see patterns where others see chaos. You see the macro in the micro. This often makes your thought process difficult for linear thinkers to follow. You speak in metaphors. You jump from A to Z without stopping at B, C, and D. You might say to a friend, "This relationship feels like the fall of Rome," and to you it makes perfect sense. You are describing a structural decay caused by internal corruption, overexpansion, and ignoring the barbarians at the gate. But your friend just looks at you like you're crazy and says, "We're just talking about my boyfriend not doing the dishes." They don't see the archetype. You only see the archetype. You think in symbols, not just sentences. This is because your mind is tapped into what Jung called the collective unconscious, the deep reservoir of ancestral wisdom that all humans share. You don't just solve problems, you dissolve them by changing the level of thinking. You are the person at work who raises their hand and says, "We don't need to fix the marketing strategy. We need to fix the soul of the product." You go to the root, you go to the essence. This ability makes you incredibly creative, but it also makes you easily bored by the mundane. Routine, repetitive tasks that lack meaning feel like torture to you. You need complexity. You need mystery. You need to be solving the puzzle of existence, not just polishing the pieces. You are not designed for the assembly line. You are designed for the drawing board of reality. And finally, the fifth sign, which brings everything together, a deep relationship with synchronicity. Jung coined the term synchronicity to describe meaningful coincidences, events that have no causal relationship but are deeply mysteriously connected by meaning. For the rationalist, the materialist, a coincidence is just a statistical probability. It's random noise. If you think of a friend and they call you a minute later, it's just chance. If you find a book that answers the exact question you are asking yourself, it's just luck. But for you, these moments are the signposts of the universe. You live your life guided by these nudges. You don't dismiss them. You honor them. You pay attention when a book falls off the shelf. You listen when a stranger on the bus says a phrase that answers a dilemma you've been wrestling with for weeks. You notice repeating numbers, recurring themes, and serendipitous meetings that feel destined. To you, the universe is not dead matter. It is a living, breathing dialogue. You are in constant conversation with the unknown. You have likely had moments where you followed a completely irrational urge. Maybe you had a feeling to turn left instead of right. Maybe you felt compelled to walk into a specific coffee shop you've never been to. Maybe you felt a sudden urge to call someone you haven't spoken to in 5 years, and that small, illogical action changed the entire course of your life. It led to a job, a spouse, a realization, or it saved you from an accident. This is high-level intuition in action. It is the ability to flow with the Tao, the current of life, rather than swimming against it with pure logic. But this gift requires immense trust. It requires you to be willing to look crazy to the outside world. It requires you to act on information that you cannot prove in a court of law. And this is the ultimate test of the intuitive. Do you trust yourself enough to follow the invisible path? Do you trust the whisper more than the loudspeaker? Jung believed that as humanity evolves, this intuitive capacity will not just be a quirk, it will be essential for our survival. We are entering an age of unprecedented complexity. Logic alone is no longer enough to navigate the chaos of the modern world. We have enough data. What we lack is insight. We have enough knowledge. What we lack is wisdom. If you possess these 5 signs, the holographic view of time, the vision for the shadow, the somatic intelligence, the synthetic mind, and the attunement to synchronicity, you are not weird. You are not broken. You are a prototype. You are what comes next. You are the navigator for a species that has lost its way. But a navigator who does not trust their compass is useless. The world will try to gaslight you. It will tell you to be realistic. It will tell you that's just your imagination. It will demand proof for things that can only be felt. Your task, your spiritual obligation is to stand firm in your perception. Do not demand that others see what you see. They can't. You cannot explain the color blue to a man who sees only in black and white. Instead, use your vision to guide your own choices. Use your intuition to protect your energy from the shadows you detect. Use it to choose your allies wisely. Use it to create work that has a soul. You are the watcher on the wall. You see what others ignore. And that is not just a trait. It is a responsibility. I want you to really search your memory now. Think back to a time, a specific moment, when you ignored your intuition and paid the price. We all have that story, the time the logic overruled the gut and disaster followed. I want you to share that moment in the comments below, not to dwell on regret, but to serve as a warning and a lesson for others reading. Let's build a library of evidence in the comments that proves our intuition is real, so that the next time one of us doubts that inner voice, we can come back here and remember. The gut is always right. And remember, seeing the truth is only the first step. The next step is learning how to act on it without being destroyed by the shadows you expose. The world does not always welcome the seer. If you want to master the art of psychological self-defense, if you want to know how to navigate a world of masks without losing your own face, make sure you watch the video appearing on your screen now. It is the survival guide you've been looking for. Trust what you see. There's a silence that comes after the storm, and it is not peace. It is something stranger, more unnerving. When the illusions collapse and the truth is revealed, when your ego finally surrenders to the awakening you fought so hard to avoid, there comes a moment where you look around and wonder what now. You believed you had survived the awakening. You believed the worst was behind you. The nights of weeping on the bathroom floor, the panic, the existential vertigo, the dissolving of everything you once believed to be real, all of it had a conclusion in your mind. You assumed it would lead to clarity, to light, to joy. But what if I told you that moment, the one you call survival, was not the end, but the threshold? That survival was only the gate, and now you are being asked to walk through it. You see, surviving awakening is not the same as integrating it. It is one thing to awaken from the illusion. It is another entirely to build a life on the truth that was revealed. That is where the real test begins, not in the chaos of collapse, but in the quiet demand of reconstruction. And here most people falter, not because they are weak, but because no one tells them that this silence is the part that truly breaks you. The silence where the self waits, not the persona you showed the world, not the mask you wore to survive, but the self ancient, unmovable, raw in its presence and wholly uninterested in comfort. You walk now without the guideposts that once gave you direction. Family, faith, culture, ambition, those monuments have crumbled under the weight of your own questions. The dreams that once stirred your soul feel foreign now. The relationships that once felt safe now seem shallow, surface level, ill-equipped to touch the depth you've discovered. The laughter of the old world rings hollow. The language of the crowd no longer moves you. And so you walk alone, not because you want to, but because you must. Jung spoke of individuation not as a luxury, but as a necessity. The process by which a person becomes whole is not a pleasant journey. It demands you abandon the approval of the tribe. It requires you to see your shadow not as an enemy, but as a key to your truth. You thought awakening would make you more good, more spiritual, more light. But the truth is, awakening does not make you more of what the world wants you to be. It makes you real. And the real you is not always polite or safe or understood. The real you does not always want peace. Sometimes it craves the roar of truth even if it costs you everything. And it will cost you. That is the price of survival. Not just surviving the collapse, but surviving the rebirth. Because being reborn into a world that no longer recognizes you is a test most cannot endure. Here is where the test begins in the long days that follow awakening. When nothing fits. When conversations bore you. When the books that once inspired you now feel like hollow echoes. When the people who once praised you now call you distant, cold, detached. You are not broken, you are becoming. And becoming requires space. But that space feels like death. Because it is. The death of the identity you spent decades constructing. The death of the roles you played so convincingly. The death of the story that gave your life meaning. You're being called now not to return to who you were, but to find who you've never been allowed to be. That takes courage. Not the loud, dramatic courage of warriors, but the quiet, enduring courage of the soul. The courage to sit with emptiness and not fill it. The courage to allow loneliness to reshape you rather than run from it. The courage to watch your old self grieve the loss of illusions and still not turn back. Jung warned that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. This is what you are being asked to do now, not just survive the awakening, but accept the new person who emerged from it, without apology, without disguise, without the need to explain yourself to those still living in the dream, because they won't understand, and they don't need to. This isn't their test. It's yours. And so you will learn to walk in the quiet, to hold space for the version of you that no one has met before, the version that speaks in symbols and dreams in silence and fire, the version that no longer asks, "What should I do?" but instead asks, "What do I know deep in my bones?" This version of you does not beg for certainty. It lives in paradox. It knows that to truly live is to embrace what cannot be controlled. And still the test continues, because the ego, though shattered, will rebuild itself in secret. It will wear new robes and call itself awakened. It will sneak through the back door and whisper that you must now be better perfect above it all. But that is another illusion. The true test is not becoming better, but becoming whole, whole enough to contain the rage and the grace, the fear and the clarity, the doubt and the knowing, the human and the divine. And when that wholeness begins to emerge, you will notice something, not peace, not perfection, but presence. You begin to exist in a way that is unshakable. Not because you have found all the answers, but because you are no longer afraid of the questions. You have become the space in which they echo. And still the world will not understand. People will project onto you, love you for what they see, then resent you for what they cannot control. You will be called cold because you no longer react. You will be called selfish because you now choose yourself. You will be called distant because you no longer perform your pain for approval. But this too is part of the test. To remain soft while they call you hard. To remain open while they label you closed. To remain true while they call you lost. Your existence becomes the rebellion. Your calm presence becomes a threat to the chaos of the unawakened. And here finally the last part of the test, to remain in love. Not in the romantic sense, but in the raw, revolutionary sense of choosing to love the process. To love the parts of you that are still afraid. To love the world even as it misunderstands you. To love the journey even when it brings you to your knees. This is what it means to survive the awakening, not just once, but every day. Because awakening isn't an event, it is a lifelong fire, a pathless path, a devotion to truth that costs you everything you thought you were but gives you everything you truly are. And that above all is the test to not run, to not go back, to not shrink even when it burns. Because you didn't come this far just to survive. You came to live as someone who can never go back to sleep again. And that changes everything. There will be days when you wake up and feel like a stranger to everything around you. The people you love, the streets you walk, even your own reflection will feel distant, foreign, like a memory from someone else's life. That's not regression. That's integration in disguise. Because when the awakening burns away your false layers, it also burns away the familiar. The familiar is not always real. It is just what you repeated long enough to believe. And so when your old self dies, everything attached to it becomes unstable. Your dreams start to shift shape. Your values begin to unravel. Even your voice, your desires, your cravings, they all go quiet. Not because you've lost yourself, but because you're finally close to meeting yourself. And the self does not shout. It whispers, it waits, it tests. It's easy to confuse this phase with depression. After all, it feels heavy. It feels empty. It feels like something broke and never came back. But the truth is, this is sacred. This is the cocoon. This is the holy stillness that the world fears and rushes past. But you, the awakened one, are being asked to sit in it, not to escape, not to distract, but to listen. To listen to what remains when there's nothing left to prove, nothing left to hide behind, nothing left to achieve for someone else's approval. This is where you meet your archetypes, the mother, the warrior, the wanderer, the wounded child, the sacred fool. They rise not as fantasies, but as patterns inside you, and each demands attention. Each brings a mirror. Each offers both a gift and a trap. The wounded child may beg you to stay small, afraid of rejection, needing constant validation. The warrior may demand you conquer everything, even your own peace. The wanderer may tempt you to run forever, afraid of roots, allergic to stillness. These aren't flaws, they're your mythic inheritance. Jung taught us that we are not just individuals. We are stories, living myths. And the moment you awaken, you stop being the character and start becoming the author. That shift is terrifying, because it means no one else is responsible for the plot anymore. You are. And with that power comes the ultimate burden, the burden of freedom. Freedom to choose meaning. Freedom to fall and get back up. Freedom to say no. Freedom to leave what doesn't resonate, even if it once felt like home. But freedom is not comfort. Freedom is responsibility. And now the real test begins. Can you live without the scripts they gave you? Can you endure the guilt of choosing authenticity over approval? Can you bear the weight of being misunderstood by everyone you used to belong to? Because they will misunderstand. Your growth will feel like betrayal. Your silence will sound like arrogance. Your boundaries will look like cruelty. and you must let them think what they will without defending yourself. That is the spiritual maturity this phase demands. To know your own heart so deeply, you no longer beg others to validate it. To know your own path so intimately, you no longer need to explain it. This is not isolation. This is sacred solitude. This is individuation, not as escape, but as embodiment. And the world doesn't reward embodiment. It rewards conformity, performance, and masks. But you didn't awaken to play the old games better. You awakened to leave the game, to become a different kind of presence, not louder, not shinier, but real. And real is rare. Real is disruptive. Real breaks unspoken contracts. When you no longer gossip, complain, or lie to belong, people notice. When you no longer seek external worth, the systems that fed on your insecurity lose their grip. You become unpredictable, uncontrollable, and that's what scares them. Not because you're dangerous, but because you are free, and freedom terrifies those who've never tasted it. So you will lose people. You will lose opportunities. You will lose versions of yourself you swore were eternal. But you will gain something infinitely more valuable: alignment. Alignment with your soul, your essence, your quiet knowing. And in that alignment, you'll start to feel something new. Not the old happiness that came from pleasure or praise, but something deeper. Call it peace. Call it presence. Call it the return to yourself. And it won't come with fireworks. It will arrive like a breath you didn't know you were holding, finally exhaling. Like coming home to a house you didn't build but always belonged to. And in that stillness, you'll realize the test was never about proving anything. It was about becoming the kind of person who no longer needs to. And just when you think the dust has settled, that you've finally come through the worst of it, the universe will whisper a deeper invitation, not to return to life as it was, but to rebuild something entirely new with the ashes you've collected. Because this is where most people stop. They awaken, they survive, they even heal, but they quietly return to the old ways under a new name. They dress up their ego in spiritual clothes and call it transformation. But that is not individuation. That is disguise. The real test is not whether you can endure collapse. It's whether you can walk forward without reaching back, without needing to reclaim what fell apart, without needing your pain to become your identity. This is the hour of rebirth, not the romantic kind, but the quiet, hard, lonely work of reimagining what it means to exist. When the shadow has been faced, when the illusions have died, when the pain no longer defines you, what remains? That question is not rhetorical. It is a doorway. You must walk through it, not with certainty, but with sincerity. Because the new you is not a better version of the old one. It is an entirely new species, built from truth, not performance, forged in fire, not applause. And that's where the loneliness sharpens. Because the more real you become, the fewer mirrors you find. The more free you are, the more alien you seem. Not because you're broken, but because you're awake in a world that still sleeps with its eyes open. You'll begin to notice things others don't. The lies hidden in small talk, the projections in praise, the subtle manipulations in relationships, not because you're cynical, but because your eyes are no longer filtered by the need to belong. That's the hardest part. Not the awakening, not the healing, but the deep, permanent shift in perception. You can no longer unknow what you've seen. You can no longer shrink yourself into shapes that made sense before. You are too awake for that now. And it hurts. It hurts to love people who are still asleep. It hurts to watch them run in circles, repeating pain, defending illusions, calling it just life. You'll want to scream to save them, to pull them out. But you can't. That's not your role anymore. Your role now is to become, to embody, to walk as the evidence that awakening is real even if no one understands what you paid to become it. And in time, you'll see some will notice. Not because you preached, but because you lived. Some will quietly follow. Not your words, but your presence. Because there is a kind of quiet power in those who have survived their own death and returned with eyes that see differently. That's the gift you carry now, not just survival, but transmission, not just knowledge, but knowing. You've become a living symbol of what it looks like to no longer chase what doesn't fit your soul, of what it means to say yes to the unknown, of what it costs to live in alignment with your truth even when it's inconvenient, uncomfortable, or lonely. And yet even with this depth, even with this clarity, there will be days when you wish you hadn't woken up at all, when you envy the sleepwalkers, when you miss the simplicity of unconsciousness, because awareness can be a heavy crown, and there's no going back. That too is part of the test. Can you keep going when there's no one cheering? Can you trust your path even when it looks like failure to everyone else? Can you carry the silence as your companion, not your punishment? Because silence after awakening is not emptiness. It is initiation. It is the space where new truths are born. The truths that cannot be shouted, only whispered. The truths that live not in language, but in the way you carry yourself, the way you listen, the way you no longer betray your knowing. And from this place, something extraordinary begins to emerge, not in a blaze of glory, but in the subtle shift of your being. You no longer need to be seen to feel real. You no longer seek validation to feel worthy. You no longer apologize for your depth. That is sovereignty. That is what the soul has been after all along. Not perfection, not escape, but wholeness. And wholeness includes the parts you once banished. The anger, the fear, the longing, the ache, the desire, the grief. They are all welcome now, because now you know they were never the enemy. They were the map. They were the fire that brought you home. And that home isn't a place. It's not a relationship. It's not a belief system. It's a frequency, a state of being, a way of walking through the world without armor, without shame, without needing to dominate or disappear. You begin to walk like someone who knows who they are beneath every story. You begin to speak from a place that cannot be manipulated. You begin to love not from scarcity, but from overflow. Not to get something, but because you have become something. And that something is not a final version. It's a process, a living, breathing, evolving self, one that is always listening, always learning, always shedding what no longer fits. That is the real awakening. Not a finish line, but a lifelong unfolding. And the moment you think you're done, the test will shift again. Not as punishment, but as initiation. Because every layer you shed brings you closer to the essence. And the essence has no limit, no ceiling, no box. It only asks one thing: that you keep going, that you keep listening, that you keep trusting even when everything falls apart again, especially then. Because every time it falls, you're given another chance to rise, not as the person you were, but as the presence you've always been. And in the deep, echoing silence of this becoming, something begins to crack, not in destruction, but in revelation. You start to see that your awakening was never about becoming extraordinary. It was about becoming true. All the striving, the effort, the identity, chasing the endless hunger for significance, it begins to fall away. And beneath it, something ancient waits. Something timeless. The self. The one Jung spoke of not as a concept, but as a living center. It does not speak in noise. It does not compete. It simply is. And the more you listen, the more you stop needing to define yourself. You become a mystery to your own mind, and yet you feel more real than ever before. Because this is not about building a new ego. It's about dissolving the illusion that you were ever separate from what you were seeking. That's the paradox the world cannot teach you. That you are never broken. You are never lost. You only believed you were because you inherited a world built on forgetfulness. A world that profits from your disconnection. Awakening doesn't give you new beliefs, it strips them away. Until all that's left is presence, and in presence there is no role to play. No mask to wear, no ladder to climb. There is only the raw truth of who you are, unfiltered, unapproved, unrepeatable. That truth doesn't make life easier. In fact, it often makes it harder. Because now you feel everything. The subtle betrayals in conversation, the wounds behind people's anger, the desperation behind their ambition. You see through it all, and sometimes it breaks your heart. You wish you could unsee. But you can't. You've stepped into the archetype of the seer. And with that vision comes grief. Not just for yourself, but for the world. You grieve for the child you were who never got to be. You grieve for the years lost to illusions. You grieve for humanity trapped in cycles it doesn't even notice. And still you carry on. Not because it's easy, but because you have no other choice. Once the veil is lifted, there is no going back. You can smile, you can nod, you can play along when needed. But inside, you live in a different realm now, a place where the soul speaks louder than the world, and that inner voice becomes your compass. It doesn't scream. It doesn't promise comfort, but it never lies. It leads you through the dark, through the ache, through the rage, and eventually into peace, not the peace of escape, but the peace of embodiment. A peace that can hold paradox, that can hold pain and still stay open, that can say yes to life even when it hurts. And yes, it will still hurt. Awakening doesn't make you invincible. It makes you transparent, more sensitive, more porous, more affected by everything, but also more rooted. Because now your roots are not in opinion or appearance. They are in essence. And that essence is immovable. You can be shaken, but not shattered. Lost, but never gone. Alone, but never abandoned. Because the self never leaves. Even when you forget, it remembers. Even when you collapse, it holds you. Even when the shadow rises again, and it will, it stands at your side. Not to save you, but to remind you that you are already whole. And that's the final secret no one tells you about survival. That survival was never the goal. Integration is, embodiment is. Living as the self in a world that demands the mask, that is the lifelong initiation. That is the fire you must walk through again and again. Not to prove anything, but to stay awake, to stay real. And realness is not an achievement. It's a practice. A moment-by-moment return to what is, to who you are, to what cannot be explained but can always be felt. That's what you begin to carry now, not just wisdom, but presence. The kind of presence that changes a room without a word, that listens more than it speaks, that sees without needing to correct. You become less interested in convincing and more devoted to being. You stop trying to be understood and you start understanding. You stop fighting for a seat at the table and you build your own. And those meant to find you will, not because you chased them, but because your presence called them. That's the magnetism of authenticity. It doesn't push, it doesn't perform, it simply radiates. And in a world starving for something real, that kind of light is irresistible. But it's not for everyone. Some will fear it. Some will resent it. Some will try to dim it. Let them. Your job is not to make them comfortable. Your job is to remain a mirror, a reminder, a living embodiment of what it means to survive the death of illusion and still choose to live. Not as a shell, but as a soul. And here in this stillness you begin to smile, not the smile of performance, but the smile of recognition. You made it through, not to the end, but to the truth. And that truth, no matter how heavy, no matter how lonely, is yours. No one can take it. No one can fake it. No one can give it to you. Because you earned it. You faced the dark. You met your shadow. You died to the version of yourself that the world created. And now, here you are. Not finished, not perfect, but present. And that, above all, is the victory. That is the real survival, to live with your eyes open, your heart open, your soul intact. To walk through the fire and not be burned but forged. To say yes to the path again and again, not because it's easy, but because it's true. And now, standing at the edge of everything you've become, there's a silence that doesn't ache anymore. It hums, it pulses, it breathes with you. You realize this silence isn't emptiness, it's spaciousness. a clearing within yourself that you fought your way into. And in that clearing, the self speaks not in words, but in direction, in alignment. You know what to walk toward, even if you don't know why. You know what to walk away from even when it hurts. And that knowing doesn't come from logic. It comes from resonance, from that deep, unmistakable feeling in your bones that says, this is right, this is real. That is the compass now. Not opinion, not fear, not expectation, just truth. Subtle, steady, unshakable. You no longer live to survive, you live to express the wholeness you fought for, the integration you bled for, the presence you became when there was nothing left to pretend. And in that expression, you don't need permission. You don't need applause. You don't even need understanding. You speak not to convince, but to reflect. You move not to impress, but to embody. You love not to possess, but to liberate. That is the shift. The final one. The one they don't talk about in books or workshops. Because it cannot be taught. It can only be lived. You've become the kind of human who no longer fits in anywhere because now you belong everywhere. Not in the sense of social inclusion, but in the deeper sense of spiritual rootedness. You walk through the world like a soul that has come home not to a place, but to itself. And when you speak, people will feel it. Even if they don't understand it, they will sense something in you that doesn't bend for comfort, that doesn't shrink for approval, that doesn't mask its own fire. That something is your essence. Untamed, uncorrupted, unapologetic. And yes, it will still be tested. Life doesn't stop testing you once you awaken, it tests you more. Because now you are not allowed to lie to yourself without consequence. Now every compromise echoes louder. Every false yes leaves a bitter aftertaste. Every time you betray your knowing, your body will tell you. Your dreams will tell you. Your silence will scream. This is not punishment, it's refinement. The soul doesn't want comfort. It wants truth. And truth is a fire that doesn't just burn away what isn't you, it ignites what is. So you live on, awake, aware, alone sometimes, alive always. You no longer seek the old highs, the emotional sugar of being wanted, liked, admired. You crave depth now. You crave meaning. You crave intimacy with life itself. Not the performative kind, but the sacred kind. The kind where every moment feels like a doorway, every breath a ritual, every interaction a mirror. You no longer chase experiences, you become one, and those who are ready will recognize you. Not because you fit their idea of wisdom, but because you reflect a part of them they've been longing to remember. That is the gift of surviving the awakening, not just to become yourself, but to become a lighthouse for others, silently drifting through the same dark sea. You won't save them. That was never your job. But you will remind them that survival is possible, that the fire is not the end, that there is life after the death of everything false. A life more real, more raw, more rooted than anything they could have imagined while asleep. And that life, this life you're building, is not linear. There is no summit, no arrival. There are only deeper layers, sharper mirrors, softer truth, and the work is never done. Because you are not a problem to solve. You are a mystery to be lived. The self is not a destination. It is a relationship, one that deepens with every breath, every loss, every truth you dare to face. You will fall again. You will forget, you will doubt, but this time you won't abandon yourself. This time the fall won't feel like failure, it will feel like another doorway, another fire, another initiation into the next version of your truth. And you will walk through again and again, not because you are lost, but because you are found. You know now surviving the awakening was only the beginning. Living it, that's the real test. And you brave soul are doing it. Quietly, fiercely, unfolding one breath at a time, into the person you were always meant to be. You are no longer a seeker. You are the space in which seeking dissolves. You are no longer desperate for answers. You are the answer written in the language of becoming. And the world, whether it understands or not, is better because you survived. Not just to breathe, but to burn. Not just to awaken, but to embody. Not just to exist, but to be. Welcome to the real test. Not to pass, not to win, but to live. Fully, authentically, unforgettably. You made it.